Hello, this is Dr. Tirrell, and we're going to be looking at a design tutorial about how to produce your book jacket. So there are a couple of things we want to get out of this. One is specific experience using particular tools. So in this case, Adobe Photoshop, Creative Cloud, and GIMP, the GNU image manipulation program. These are both pixel editors or raster image editors. Which we'll talk about more in class, but basically they work on things, files, images that are stored as pixels. Photoshop is the industry standard photo editor. GIMP is an open source program, and as we'll talk about in class, there are obviously different affordances and ideologies associated with tools. So I want us to have exposure to both. We also want to look at how to find appropriate resources for this project. As part of this project, you can't violate any IP laws. Copyright would be the one that's at play here. There are other IP laws like patent and trademark, but copyright's the one that we're going to have to worry about now. So we're going to look for things that are in the public domain or Creative Commons licensed. As we talked about in class, everything you create in the United States by default is copyrighted to you. You can't get rid of that, but certain things after a certain amount of time fall into the public domain, which means they can be used however anybody wants. Other things like governmental work falls into the public domain too. Some things also you can optionally license as Creative Commons. That sits above copyright. It's just sort of a legal contract that if you're someone who creates things and you want to allow people use of it without specifically contacting you, you can apply a Creative Commons license, but it is optional, and it doesn't undo copyright. And more importantly, or most importantly, we want to practice designing to suit rhetorical goals. There's probably not objective good and bad design per se. Everything's always situated, right? So who are we talking to? What's the context? And what are we trying to accomplish? That's how we can make judgments of effective or ineffective. But these things are always situated, so we want to practice that. Okay, so our first step here is we have to pick a text, and for our purposes, I picked Frankenstein. I'm going to go to our assignment page. And remember that we have to pick a public domain text, and the perhaps easiest way to do that is through Project Gutenberg. There are other repositories of public domain texts. I just picked out Frankenstein, and it is in the public domain in this country. What that means is the text of Frankenstein is in the public domain, but actual publications of it, those are new works that are copyrighted. So for example, if we look at all the other Frankenstein book covers, well, not all of them, but you know what I'm saying. The text in Frankenstein actually is in the public domain in this country, but each one of these works is a new work, so it is copyrighted. That means I can't just take one of their copies or one of their covers and say, well, that's mine now, right? That's a new work. The text itself, however, is public domain. So this is useful because it points out there's lots of other or lots of avenues we can go with Frankenstein, right? Some people address sort of the movie representation, right, or focus on horror, but it's not just a horror text. It's also science fiction. It's also psychological, profile in a way. It has elements of the romantic. There's lots of things going on in that text. And you can see that here in the difference of covers. Some people focus on viscera. We have a body here. We've got a heart here, an anatomical drawing. Some people pick up, the movie imagery, although that's not really textual, but it's something we associate with Frankenstein. What I want to do is focus on kind of the psychological aspect of it and how the two men are kind of, or the two beings, I suppose, are kind of blurred, Frankenstein and his creature. Frankenstein is the doctor, of course. The creature, I've read Frankenstein a lot. I don't think he has a name. I think he's unnamed. Someone correct me if that's incorrect, but that's what we're focusing on, is this blurring between the two creatures. They're the two entities. We do, of course, have to think about our aesthetic approach. because that is something we do with each draft. I'm just going to make one draft because this is a tutorial, but you'll be using two different ones. The same book, but two drafts serving different audiences, contexts, and purposes, and different aesthetic approaches. I've looked through a few. I'm going to go with the Manifesto of Visionary Art. It has associations with surrealism, which is an actual school. We use surreal just to mean weird, but there is an actual aesthetic approach of surrealism that has associations with non-real representation. So the language of dreams, the language of altered states. And when I say language, I mean some sort of visual representation that isn't literal. It's not photographic in nature. Visionary art picks that up and sort of talks about finding a visual grammar of dream language. So I'm going to focus on that. It's appropriate to the topic. I'm going to be building in elements that are dreamlike, that are based in reality but unreal. They're not photographic in representation. They're going to be a tweaked or sort of hyper real, although that itself is a term, depiction of things. I also want to use representations that are suggestive but not literal. So I'm going to be using some geometric shapes. I'm going to be focusing on environments, not just characters, but environments and how those represent internal states. That's something called the pathetic fallacy, that the exterior environment represents an internal character state. So that's something that shifts away from strict reality as well. And because this is a tutorial, I'm going to be just pulling some strategies from existing covers just to demonstrate sort of, well, how do you do that, right? You guys, of course, are creating original works, as am I. But, part of design also is examining the context, right? What other stuff is out there and what inspires me, what strategies might be useful. So, I'm going to be looking at the sort of these kind of things where we see a figure in a landscape. This is one, although it's kind of small. This one. This is sort of going to be the structure where we are working with. But then I also want to pull in some of the non-literal representations. This is a really neat one that uses these geometric figures and rectilinear representations. I'm going to pull in some of that. This as well does kind of the same thing. It knocks down the colors, as both of these do, and really just sort of focuses on these sort of primitive shapes. So I'm going to be doing some of that in our tutorial. This as well does some of that. You can see the face looks like a vector rather than a raster representation. But I also like this perpendicular text. I'm going to be pulling in that as a strategy as well. So I'm going to be kind of more explicitly just pulling in stuff that we see here. You never want to just straight up copy. But for the purpose of this tutorial, I do want you to get a handle on, well, if I want to do something like that, how do I do it, right? So just the strategy of it. And ultimately, that's what we want. The point of this isn't teach you how to use a tool, because tools change. What we want is rhetoric and design, okay? So how do I take apart the needs of a situation, its audience, context, and purpose? And then how do I know the procedures to represent that visually? That's how rhetoric and design tie together. Tools change, and they're different in different places, and sometimes they don't work, right? Since I'm recording this right now, I guarantee you, something's going to crash, something's going to blow up, and I'm going to swear, and then I'm going to open it up again. That's how tools, operate. Importantly, we have to figure out, what am I trying to do here rhetorically, and then how can I manifest that, however I choose to do that. Okay, so that's that. Let's go back to our project page. Because we do want to think, well, actually, in fact, if we go to our syllabus, we have to think realistically about, where am I going to get these tools? And, you don't have to use any particular tool for this project. If you want, you can hand draw it. And if you remember one of the drafts we looked at, one of the Moby Dick drafts, it was hand drawn. It's perfectly fine. Really what we're interested in here is design choices, the product of design, but also how it's working rhetorically. So you don't have to use anything. If you're going on in a design-influenced career, you probably do want to get exposure to the industry standard tools. like the Adobe Creative Cloud Suite. As I mentioned, you don't have to get this for our class. You may want to. I mean, it is the industry standard. You will use it in other places, but it is a subscription model. You can't just buy it outright. You have to get a subscription. They do down here under licensing options, I think. Maybe it's see all plans. Yeah, because this is another hurdle if you go through that. They do have a student license that's $19.99, just $20 a month. Here it is. So, make sure to pursue that because you are students if this is something you want to do. If not, you can use any other tool you want. GIMP, which we're going to be covering today, is a free open source program. Go ahead and just go through our syllabus and go to the GIMP main page here if you want to download it. The reason why is because it's open source, other places will distribute it, but they'll put in other stuff that you don't want. If you go straight to the GIMP homepage, you can download it directly. This is free, comes without cost, it's open source. That might be an attractive option. It's the principles we'll talk about and the operations are very, very similar. But we should be aware that Adobe is the industry standard. So that's, if you're in a design field, what you're probably going to be using. But ultimately, you don't want to get yoked to any particular tool. You want to figure out how to do this kind of stuff, right? Whatever you're using. And there are tons and tons of other pixel editors out there. If you have a preferred one, go ahead and use it. The only caveat I mentioned to folks is sometimes people have things that are online, like Pixlr or something like that. But a lot of online services don't handle print resolution. They only deal in screen resolution. And we're doing something that needs to be in print resolution because it's ultimately for print. Sorry, that was me taking a drink of water and then choking a little bit. That's my only catch, is make sure that it's something that can handle print resolution. So I've got both of these, and we're going to walk through using both of them, one after the other, but we're going to be doing the same stuff, basically. So we're going to start with Photoshop. I've already got it open because it takes a while to open, and it's a big, bloated, crashy program. It's not nearly as crashy as GIMP, though, in fairness. So, I've got this open, and our first step really is, where do we get imagery, right? We need something to work with. If I open this up, what do I do? Do I just start drawing or whatever? We're going to get some imagery to work with, some materials to bring in. And we want to look at sort of those three different things that we looked at the beginning here. Things that we can use because we own the copyright to it, and that means anything we create. Things that are in the public domain, and things that are Creative Commons. Now, you don't have to use all three of these. I just want to show you examples. So, don't feel as though that's a necessary part of this project. It's just sort of three sources you can go to pick up stuff. Whatever we do, though, we want to make sure we're documenting it because we want to make sure we're giving proper attribution, and we want to make sure we're also going to be citing properly. And those are two different processes, actually. Attribution means giving credit to the author of a work that we are using. And that's a legal thing. If I pulled somebody's work, even if it's Creative Commons licensed, and I didn't give them credit that the license said I had to use, then in theory, they could sue me because I'm not in compliance with that contract. Citation is a matter of plagiarism, right? That's an academic matter. That means pointing out through a particular format, this is the work I used, and I'm not plagiarizing, I'm citing my source. So these are related but different things. Attribution protects you from lawsuits. Citations protects you from plagiarism. So we're going to be documenting what we use. I, worked this up already. So I took a photo of myself. That's me in the corner of my dining room, just sort of hunched over a little bit because I'm going to be playing Frankenstein for our purposes. So I own the copyright here because I took it. It's not because I'm in it, curiously enough. It's because I took it. If you take a photo in a public place, for example, you own the copyright to that, even if other people are in it. There are some caveats to that, but that's basically it. I then also want to get some stuff from Creative Commons. Whoops, wrong one. Creative Commons and public domain, just as examples. So I'm going to go to our assignments page and Publics Project. And here at the bottom, there's a link to the Creative Commons search. There's lots of ways to find Creative Commons or public domain images or whatever. This is just one convenient one. And it does have these two check boxes for if you want commercial use and if you want stuff that can be modified. I certainly want it to be modified. And in truth, this is an academic project, so it's not strictly commercial. But I am going to check this box or leave it checked, because if I were to actually publish this, I'd want to make sure it's clear. You know, my usage is okay. So I'm going to leave those both checked. And I'm going to put in Snow Mountain because I want an image of a snow-capped mountain. And what it did was, because Google Web was selected here, it took me to Google's search. You can check other places like Flickr here. So I could pull these Google Images, directly. And the difference between going through that search engine and just using Google, just typing in Google and, Snow Mountain here. See, if I do just a broad image search, some of these are going to be copyrighted, and I can't even tell, right? I don't know. Assumedly, someone has the copyright of this because someone made it, but I don't know who it is, and that means I can't use it anyway. So I don't want to do that. I want to make sure I go through that Creative Commons search so that it automatically picks up stuff that's already labeled for reuse with modification, right? You can see how it's already selected up here. And I'm going to use this first one, both because I like it and it's convenient, but it also shows this contrast between the blue mountains and this sort of ominous red sky. Because of the aesthetic approach we're using, the visionary art, I want to tap into sort of this notion of the pathetic fallacy and how an internal state is being represented, right? It's not a literal landscape, it's a metaphorical landscape, or it's augmented. So I'm going to start with this, and this is from Wikimedia Commons, and it provides all the information we need for attribution and citation. What I'm going to do is click download here. And I did that because it provides in a convenient way all the information I need. So I'm just going to copy this. And I'm going to write it down here. So I'm going to call this, mountain picture. Oops, I misspelled it. Typing too fast. And I'm also going to put in the page URL just in case there's stuff that I need for citation purposes that isn't here, right? And there is. Citation is more detailed than attribution. So I want to make sure I have this page URL so I can always come back and get everything I need for citation. And I'm going to download it here at full resolution. When you're dealing with pixel art, you always want the largest, the deepest resolution you can get. As we'll talk about in class, there is a relationship between resolution and physical size. It gets a little sticky, so we'll deal with it in class rather than right now. But the takeaway is you always want the biggest, most dense thing, because you can always get smaller or lower resolution, but you can't go in the other direction, right? Otherwise it gets pixelated and weird looking. For our purposes, it's actually not going to be a big problem. But there it is. Now I also want something in the foreground of our image for the figure, me, to stand on. So I'm going to search for red rock here in Google Images. And what I want is something kind of foregroundy, right? If you remember, I'm kind of using this and this as sort of our structural model. So I want something in the foreground, and I see some options here. I'm going to go with this one because I can put this in the foreground nicely. It's kind of like the arrangement I want, just with the different background. I'll have to do a little bit of rotating and flipping and flopping, but it'll be fine. So this comes from Pixabay, which actually collects public domain stuff. So I don't actually have to attribute to anybody because it's in the public domain, but I do need to cite. So I'm going to write this down anyway. Red Rock. And I'm just going to copy the page URL here so that when I need to do citation, I can come back and do that. Okay, so I've got that, and the other image I'm using, you know, the figure that's, I have the copyright because I took it. And those are the 3 images we're going to use. I'm going to download this, and I actually know from past experience, if you try and do XL, it's going to ask you to sign up, which I could do, but I'm not going to. So I'm just going to scale down to L and download it. Okay, so we've got our 3 images. We got me, we've got the background image, and the foreground rock image, and we're going to tinker with these. So now that we've got our imagery, we're going to go into Photoshop. And as I mentioned, I'm going to be doing the same thing in Photoshop and GIMP, more or less, same kind of product. And I am going to be moving kind of quickly because this is an overview. Feel free to, of course, talk to me about specific questions when we're in class. That's what class is for. You know, it's workshop-y. So you can talk to me about, hey, how do I do this again? Or, you know, I'm trying to do this particular thing. That's what we'll look at in class. This I'm going to be kind of brisk. I'm going to make a new image here. It's already set up because I just did this, but we want it to be, instead of pixels, which is what it usually defaults to use images. We want to use 6:9. I'm not just, you know, pulling that out of the hat. That is our dimension for the book jacket here on our project page, and that's a common size. And generally, of course, that's width by height. It's rare to see it go the other direction. Some art books do. Often resolution will default to 72. That's screen resolution. We want it to be 300. That is standard print resolution. So 6:9 inches, 300 resolution. Our color mode, ultimately, our color mode will be CMYK. That tends to be what you use for print. I mean, even if it's in another color mode, generally it gets transformed into CMYK, because if you're going to be using a 4-color print process, that means they're going to be using those 4 inks. C is blue, M is, it's cyan, technically. M is magenta, which is red. Y is yellow, which is yellow, and then K is black. So it uses those 4 inks. RGB, that's red, green, blue. That's for screen, generally, and that's because it uses those actual light colors. We want our background to be transparent, although it's not going to matter because those images are going to be over it. So here's our thing, and because I'm recording this, it's actually, it's a little quirky because there's some lag, and I'm running out of RAM and that kind of stuff. But this is a mock-up of our cover. What I'm going to do first is just open up our background image. Okay, and I am going to want to manipulate this a little bit. Let me see here. I'm going to do a couple of things. Right now it's in RGB, which is fine because it's going to convert to CMYK, but we can do manipulations here. What I'm going to do right now actually is probably just copy it over. So I'm just going to select all, copy it over, because I want to manipulate it a little bit before I do some filter and color stuff and whatever. Now what happened is when I pasted it, it's actually much larger than 6:9. So you can actually see the perimeter there. I'm going to go to Edit and Transform and Scale, and then just drag it. And I do actually want to distort it a little bit because I want these peaks to be really kind of, you know, high and large like this. So I'm not going to just squeeze them completely together, but I am distorting it a little bit. So I'm going to drag the corner out to about here. I like that. Move this around a touch. Another thing to think about is the rule of thirds. That's a design guideline where you divide things into 3 columns, both horizontally and vertically. And then where those lines meet, those vertices are sort of action points. So I'm going to try and kind of line things up by that, which would mean pushing this over a hair. That's good. That's fine. You can see if we look at this, it is pixelated because we're doing the operation right now. If I hit return or enter there, it'll smooth it out. I do want to tinker with the brightness and such here. I do want to brighten this up a bit. Whoa, not that much. We'll put it down to about 20. And I want to up the contrast to get this, to bring out the blue-red difference there. See if I tweak it way up, it's really contrasting. We'll put it, 40 is good. Okay, close that out. And I'm going to open my foreground image. Red rock. Okay, and I do want to get rid of this background actually before I move it. So there are a couple of things I could do. I could use this lasso tool over here. And what this allows me to do is draw sort of an arbitrary shape that gets selected. You see that? So what I could do is just kind of draw around the edge here, just like this. And select my rock that way. Whoops, I didn't finish drawing around it. But before I try that, I'm actually going to give the quick selection tool a shot. That's over here with the magic wand. And what you can do is when you click and hold down shift, it'll start, see how it's growing, this selection? And it has a threshold right now of 30, which means it's essentially color difference. How close is this other thing in color? If I hold down shift and kind of click around here, do you see how that's expanding to get all the rocks? That's great. That means I don't have to do any fiddly deleting or selecting around here. I can probably just select these rocks all at once. Fantastic. So now this dotted line means these rocks are selected. I'm going to just copy and paste here. Select the arrow here and move it around. So that's pretty good, and it's actually pretty close to 6 inches. I am going to do a couple of operations, though. I want to flip. See how right now this is the balance is off. Remember the design term balance. It's really heavy over here on the right. I want to play this off the peak here. So I'm going to go here to edit, transform, flip horizontal. Okay, and now this is appropriate. The balance is a little bit better. We've got, heavy, heavy. The colors are where I want it to be. We got the stark red-blue contrast. I am going to tweak this up a bit, though. This orientation is pretty good, and you can tell the sun is over here, and it's darker over here because the shadow, see how the shadow is being cast underneath? That's something we're going to have to keep in mind for the figure. But that's good. It's sort of going this way. You can't really see it too much on this, so it's not conflicting with our background. I am going to rotate this just a hair. So I'm going to go to rotate, edit, transform, rotate. And I'm going to rotate this just a little bit like that. Or do I want it flatter? Do I want it like that or like that? Maybe sharper to represent the internal state and to more closely align with the peak there, right? Showing that it's a very sort of sharp, treacherous landscape. So I'll make it a little bit crazier. That means I'm going to have to scale or distort it just a little bit here. And those are two different things, actually. So I'll do scale. I want it flat, but I'm going to bring this up a little bit. Okay. So a little thing, but I kind of like that. And I might move this over just a hair to see if I can get those points not completely in line. Yeah. There they are. Okay, so we've sort of got column here and column here. That's good. All right, so that's that. Let's open up my whoops, wrong key. That figure of me. And that might be the trickiest one because I bet you I'm not going to get a good sample with the quick selection tool. Let's give it a try and see what happens. Okay, that's pretty good. Let's see if we can get in my ear. I'm going to zoom in just a hair so I can kind of see. Am I going bald? Ugh. That better just be the light. Well, let's finish. Let's see. So you'll notice it's getting a little bit outside, but that's fine. That's fine. I can edit that up a little bit. Let's try my pants. Yeah, and see my pants, the color is so close to that gray, my dang neutral palette at home, that it is getting some extra stuff, but that's no big deal. Make sure we get all of my shoe, my hand here. Okay, so what I'm actually going to do here is I'm going to go over here to the layers. You can see it says background and it's locked. I'm going to duplicate this layer. And the reason why I'm doing that is if I try and delete on the background layer, it's not going to be transparent. So and it's also locked. You can change that, but I'm not going to. The easiest thing to do is just duplicate the layer. And I'm going to delete the old background and stick with this new one. Now what I can do is go up here to select inverse. And what happens, let me zoom out, is instead of selecting me, it's now selected everything around me. And if I click, delete, it's gotten rid of that. So now I just need to delete these extra parts. And, you can actually do this generally by using either quick selection or its partner, the magic wand tool. By changing the tolerance, which is how close items are in color. See, look, there I can kind of get that edge, so I can kind of go through this a little bit at a time and see, if I changed it here, we're getting some, but not all. For our purposes, I'm just going to go in and hand do it because I don't want to spend a lot of time. This is a tutorial. So I'm just going to go to the eraser tool here. You can change it to a brush, which gives it, you can get a little bit of a wet edge. A pencil, which has a hard edge. That's what I'm going to use. Or if you use the block, it's always the same size. Whenever you zoom out or zoom in, see, it stays the same size. Pencils and brushes have set sizes, so you have to manipulate them. See, this is a pretty big pencil. If I try and delete in here, it's going to mess it up, so I have to scale it down a little bit. Have a smaller pencil. There we go. Okay, and I'm just going to erase around myself. If this were something I were actually doing as a project, I'd actually take the time to do this right, but this is a tutorial, so I'm just going to whip through it. Oops, maybe not quite that bad. I'm going to zoom in here and use the block to get my thumb. Oops. Although, truth be told, these fine details aren't really going to show up. I could have a glove on and nobody would notice because of what we're going to do. Okay, so let's go back to, we'll use that pencil again. We'll get here, do it nice and coarse. And actually, for our aesthetic approach and the filters we're going to apply, having it rough is not going to hurt. I mean, I'm Frankenstein, for goodness sake. Or am I? I mean, that's part of the thing we want to point out in the image we make is you're never quite sure if it's Dr. Frankenstein or if it's the monster or whatever, but we'll get there. Let's just magic wand this stuff and we can bump up the tolerance because there's a break in between. Okay, and we'll just finish up any dirty pixels we left. I want to use the block for that. Okay, so this is all fine. Okay, so there I am. We can copy me over because it's transparent here. It's not going to hurt our image. Oh, I'm much bigger than I need to be. So I'm going to scale down with Edit, Transform, Scale. And now this one, if I just drag the corner, see how you can stretch, you can shrink, that kind of thing. If I hold down Shift here, it locks the ratio together. And that's what we want. Maybe that big. I do want some sense of the scale that, this is a giant place. So scale me down a little bit to there. That's probably fine. Move them over there. Let's zoom in just a hair so this becomes easier. A couple of things. I'm going to flip me on the horizontal so that the light is hitting appropriately. There we go, because you can see it's dark shadow over here. Shadow here and light on this shoulder. Also, my foot position is better this way. So there's that. I also want to, well, we'll do that in a second. I just sort of want to position myself here. All right, so here's an overview of what our cover looks like. But, you know, this is kind of, it looks like it's pieced together because it is. They're different sort of image style sources and that kind of thing. So we're going to tweak color and use some filters to make this look more coherent and to be more in line with our rhetorical goals and our aesthetic approach. I'm gonna start in the background here. Go to image and make some adjustments. We did brightness. Let's see if I want to tweak the blue here. No, I don't want to do, let's try just cyan. Let's see. That's too blue. Let's tweak it just a bit just to make that contrast pop. And we can do the same for the red rocks here as well. Image adjustments, we'll do brightness contrast. Yeah, we do want to brighten those up. 40 and make the contrast real red. Maybe less brightness. Yeah, and more contrast. Okay. Now we've got that, you know, real distinction between the blue and the reddish. Okay, and I want to apply a couple of filters here. So I am going to go back to my background layer. Maybe just the one filter. Okay, one thing, the filter I want to use is actually grayed out because right now we're in CMYK color space. I'm going to have to pop it over to RGB just to be able to use this, this filter. I'll convert it back to CMYK after I'm done. Okay, let me zoom out. This is the cutout filter. And you can kind of see how it works. It knocks down the colors, the number of colors, and then it also knocks down the shapes. And you can control that over here with these sliders. So if I put the number, oh crud. Let's see if I can do anything. Oh, that's no good. Let's see if it was just a memory issue. Yeah, it looks like. Sorry, but as I mentioned, and hey, I didn't even swear. If I shift the levels here, you can see how it changes, right? It gets a lot more crisp. If I put the levels way down, it gets more kind of smooth and blank. So I want to get it somewhere here in the middle where it's, you know, representing this internal state in a suggested way. I'm going to change the simplicity. There are 3 sliders here, and just by playing with them, you can see what they do. If I put the simplicity way up, yeah, see, that's kind of nice. But we're a little too impressionistic for me. Put the fidelity down to that. Let's put the fidelity up maybe 1 or 2. Yeah. All right, so that's kind of what I was thinking. So I'm going to click OK, and there. Now my background is rendered out in this style. Let me just really quickly show you the difference, right? So there it was before, and there it is after the filter's applied, right? I'm going to do a similar thing here to my foreground rock. I'm just going to go up here to filter and cut out, and that'll apply the same filter with the same parameters. There may be call to go in there and hand tweak stuff, but let's just see. Now it looks pretty much like I wanted it to. I want to do the same thing to me, the figure as well, but I do want to tweak me just a little bit. I'm going to zoom in a hair. Let's tinker with, let's try auto and see what we get. Ooh, that's a much nicer pop. I just did auto color. It'll automatically do things for you. They're not always what you want is the catch there. So, but actually it did that pretty well. It's a nice pop, and it'll work for our our purposes. I do want to sort of render me out here a little bit, though, because I don't look much like Frankenstein. I'm going to use the same filter, but I want to knock down my colors quite a bit here. Yeah, that's more in keeping, because I wanted it to be high color on the environment, but low color. That's maybe too low for the figure. Let's say maybe 3, and if we spike up the simplicity, yeah, that's kind of what I was thinking. Fidelity will do that, so we have to, it's getting a little, maybe that, oh, that looks a little sort of graphic novel-y. What I really want are, you know, kind of raw polygons. That's too polygony. There we go. That's good. Okay. Let me just back up a bit here. Yeah, and I'm going to move me around. And now one thing I'm going to add, because I'm getting a little lost, the figure is there, is I'm going to add a shadow also to match with the positioning of the light and everything. You can really see the light is strong here on the shoulder because of the filter we applied, and you can see it here on the rock as well. So the light sources are congruent. So what I want to do is make sure I can select my figure here. So just quick selection me. There we go. Because what I want to do is actually add a layer. I'm going to go layer new. And what I want to do is actually just fill it in with black. And you can use either the paint bucket tool, which is probably the easiest way. Now, interestingly, because this is selected, I can only color in that place. So I'm just going to click the paint bucket tool inside here. So there, I'm all black. Now, I want to do a couple of things. I'm going to deselect here. I want that that to be a shadow. So I want it to be partially transparent. Well, translucent is what I want it to be, which means partially transparent. So I'm going to go here to my layer and opacity, and I'm going to slide that down from 100, which means completely opaque. And if I slide it down, you start to see that the figure shows through. Let me move that out of the way so you can really see, right? So when we change the opacity, right now it's half. So this is completely dark. This is, you know, gone. Somewhere, what is a shadow? You know, maybe in there in the 50 range, maybe a little darker, maybe 60. 61, that's fine. And right now this layer is on top of the figure. That's not how a shadow works. So we've got to drag this layer 4 under layer 3, but we want to make sure it's on top of the background and the foreground rock. Now, I could use this as a straight drop shadow here if I just wanted the figure to pop. You see how when we zoom out, the figure actually pops nicely because I've got a drop shadow. But that's not what I'm going to do. This is a shadow, a human shadow. So what I want to do is position it so it's hooked to my feet, right there. And I'm going to use edit. Is it skew or distort? Well, let's try distort. Nope, I think it's skew. And we're probably going to have to rotate it first. Transform, rotate. Yeah, so we have to rotate it first, and now my foot's poking out, so I'm going to erase that. Okay, and if we zoom out, that's a possible shadow. It's not quite in line with the light source. It really should be rotated up a little bit more because you can see how the light is slightly hitting at a different angle. Also, that's the light is sort of coming from over here. I want to distort that shadow just a little bit. And this is just a nice touch or whatever, but just to sort of show you how to do some of this stuff. I think it's distort. No, it's not distort. It may be skew. I always get those confused. But there's no harm in giving it a try and seeing what's what. Yeah, although that's not giving me the result I want either. I'll try one more. Perspective, that's it. Okay, yeah, that's what I want. That's what a shadow does. Okay, so that's what I wanted right there. This is a live tutorial. Give me a break. So I'm just going to move that shadow down just a hair. There, so that it lines up. And now it's actually more in sync with the light source. So there, now we've added a semi-opaque shadow for the figure. We can kind of see, the figure pops a little bit better. And what we've done with just a couple of, some color tweaks, a filter, we've got this nice uniform graphic style that's very much in keeping with our aesthetic approach, right? The geometry, the representational shapes, right? Nothing's photorealistic. We picked up some of that, rectilinear influence. We do want to put some text on here. And I realize this tutorial is taking forever already, so we'll just sort of whip through that. Okay. I'm using Berlin Sands. You can use whatever. So one thing I want to do here is I actually want to rotate this text, which you can do. I'm not going to free rotate it, though. I just want it to be perpendicular. So we'll do 90 degrees clockwise. Surprise, surprise, it's the right side. It's because I was doing this before I started recording. So now we've got Frankenstein in there. It doesn't quite pop because it does up here, but notice when it gets low contrast down in the corner, normally what you do is you either put a very slight drop shadow or an outline, something like that, in order to clearly define the text. That's what I'm going to do. I go here. Let's say, so this is oops. And one thing I want to do is make sure this text is on the very top. It doesn't quite matter, but the text is going over everything. And let's see, we want to go to the layer. There's a text layer. I believe it's layer style blending. So what I'm actually going to do here is put a stroke on it. I'm going to put a white stroke. And you can see, let me manipulate this. You see how the text has what's called a stroke. It means an outline. So, if it's really thick, it's like that, which might be appropriate for Frankenstein. But I'm going to scale this down a hair to, let's see, do I want them touching? Or do I want just a light outline? I want a light one. We'll put it at 6. Okay, now there's this nice outline, right? And I need the author. Okay, suddenly panicked that I misspelled it. We're going to have to change the font size here. Okay. Almost. Tweak that down to, let's 68. Yeah, that's good. And now I can use the guides here to make sure it's lined up. And let's see, do we want this in a different color or anything? Let's try white and see what happens. No, that was a mistake. Okay, well, that's good enough. So there's an example of how this stuff works. Let me pull over, right? So we pulled in some of the perpendicular text. We structured it around this sort of environmental cues of the exterior is reflecting an interior state, the pathetic fallacy, pulled in some of this geometry and rectilinear design. And it's all in keeping with our aesthetic approach of, a dream language. This isn't a literal depiction. It's a metaphorical depiction of an alternate state, right? So the last thing to do would be to export this as a PDF. I'm just going to go to File, and you can I believe you can do either save as or export on Photoshop. PDF, then we'll call this cover 1. Or let's call this cover, let's spell it correctly, cover Photoshop. And it'll spit that out. Sorry, I kind of whipped through those choices. It's just because I'm accustomed to it. Pretty much any PDF, you spit it out as is fine. I'm by habit, I tweak things for higher versions, which means greater compression and that kind of thing. So here's our PDF. It'll open in Acrobat Reader at some point. Here we go. And let's scale that sucker down. Yeah, there we go. Interesting. In keeping with our aesthetic approach, in keeping with our rhetorical goals of what we're trying to do in terms of a purpose, the context and our audience, there we go. So that's a quick whip through with Photoshop. I'm going to quit out of it. Actually, I'm going to save this. Good gravy. I never saved this. Save constantly while you're doing this. It's, oh, I did save. It already saved. If it crashes, if you lose power, make sure you're saving as you go. I foolishly didn't do that. Okay, now I need to close this because it is a resource hog. Okay, so let's take a look at the GIMP. And as I mentioned, GIMP is an open source pixel editor, so it is freely available. It does a lot of the same things as Photoshop, a lot of the same operations and procedures, but things are slightly different. I mean, you can see some interface similarities. You got tools and you've got layers and undo history over here and that sort of thing. But not everything's the same. So we'll take a look at some of the differences and how to do, similar operations. Because ultimately, that's what we want, how to, design, not just simply how to learn to use a tool. So I'm going to kind of go through this a little bit quicker. And I'm going to go through it and just item at a time. So we've got picture of me here. Now, GIMP does not have the quick selection tool. It does have a magic wand, but as you can see, it's a little less precise, I find, than the Photoshop one. It does have variables you can change over here to address that. But I haven't had super luck using the magic wand. What you can do, though, and you can actually do this in Photoshop as well, is use the quick mask tool. Down here in the left corner, there's this rectangle outline. And if you click that, you see how it puts this red screen up there. What that is a mask. And what I can do when I turn that on is, you see how there's black and white over here? Those are your colors. And wherever you draw black, it makes this red, which means it's selected essentially. Wherever I draw white, so if I flip that, see what it's actually doing? It looks like it's erasing the red. It's changing the mask. You can exit this mask and see what's happened. Okay, see how it's selected that because I essentially painted it white when the quick mask was on. So that's how that works. I've got the pencil here. I'm just going to move up the size a little bit. And I'm just going to do a quick outline of me, obviously. Again, if I were doing this for real, I'd take more care. And what's good about the quick mask here is, see, this is kind of sloppy, but I can always just change colors here, right, back to black. And then I can just go over it. So you can touch it up and you can even exit the quick mask and see how it's going and then go back in, right? So it's really kind of useful. It's like a selection tool that you can just paint. Okay. So that's probably good enough for our purposes. Okay, so now that's selected. What I'm going to do is over here in the layers, I'm going to give this layer an alpha channel, which just means it can be transparent when I erase. And I'm going to select the inverse here. Here, so now I can just sort of copy and paste this over whenever I'm compiling the main image. I do want to do that sort of color shift so that it can have that impressionistic, that geometric look that we did in the Photoshop example. There are filters in GIMP. There is not a cutout filter exactly. Because it's open source, you can just download new filters. I wasn't able to find a cutout filter. I was able to find a cutout script, which actually what that is, it just goes through particular processes automatically. So you can use that, although I found it to make the program a little crashy. And GIMP is a little crashy anyway, so no need to taunt it. So we can just go through the processes ourselves, and that way we actually know what's going on, and it's educationally perhaps more appropriate. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to Blur and Gaussian Blur here under Filters. And what my goal here is to blur the fine details, and here it's zoomed in, so that when I knock down the colors, it's just dealing with sort of broad strokes rather than little tiny details. So it's set at 5. I'm going to use that. Actually, I might bump it up a little bit. Let's try like 8, even a little further. Okay, so there's the blur. You can't really tell too much from here. When you zoom in, you can see that it's blurred on the fine detail. My next step is I'm going to go up here to Image and Mode, and you can see it's in RGB. I'm going to go to Index, and what that means is you're going to tell the computer only to use a certain palette of colors, right? So I'm going to leave it here with Generate Optimum Palette, but I'm going to knock the number of colors down to, let's say, 6, and see what happens. Take a couple of passes here. Okay, now you see it did that effect. Let me show you the original, right? And here's the knockdown effect. Now I might knock down a couple more colors because you can tell I'm wearing jeans, and I don't think there were store-bought jeans in Victorian England. Sorry, I'm distracted. Let me leave the Gaussian blur, and let me just knock down a couple more colors. But you see how this works, right? I mean, we don't have to pour over this. Okay, that's good. All right. I am going to go ahead and save this just because, as I mentioned, GIMP can be a little crashy. Okay. So I'm just going to open my next one, I guess the mountain. It's asking me if I want to use its embedded color profile. I do. So what I'm going to do here, let me zoom out a bit, is I'm going to tweak the colors a little. I'm going to use color balance and just tweak the blue a bit. If you go way up, you see it's much too blue, but something like maybe a 10. Yep, that's good. And change the brightness as we did in Photoshop, maybe like a 20. And let's contrast. Let's see what 20 looks like. Yeah, that's good. Okay, I'm probably not going to put the filter on this one just yet because I am going to have to distort this a little bit. And so I probably want to do that before I apply the filter. So I'm just going to save this. Okay. There's the rocks. Okay, so on this, I'm going to follow the same process. I'm going to, oops, sorry. Turn on the quick mask here. Probably need a smaller pencil. Okay. All I did there was I used the paint bucket tool to just fill the rest of that in. So let's quick mask that. I'm going to select the inverse. I need to put an alpha channel here before I can delete the transparent. There we go. So let's go ahead and I'm just going to repeat the same steps, basically. There's the Gaussian blur. I'm going to knock this down to, let's see 4 colors and see what it looks like. Perfect. Okay, so let's go ahead and save this one, and then we'll compile them together. Okay, so I'm just going to make a new image. Now it does default to pixels, so I need to change that to inches. 6 by 9, and I do need the advanced options because I'm going to have to set the resolution at 300. I want the background to be transparent. Okay, and now we're just going to pull this together. So I'll go ahead and copy this over. Okay, now I do want to apply that scaling. So, and we've seen, this done already. So you can see this yellow perimeter is the canvas, and then I'm stretching around here. Compress a little. I'm sure that's fine. Okay. Position it just a hair. And I'm going to run through the same processes, and then we'll look at just a slight difference. I'm going to do the Gaussian blur. Oh, and I should save this just in case. And now I will change the mode to indexed. And I'm maybe going to bump this up to, let's say, 6, because I want to pick up those reds in the skyline. Okay, that's fine. And of course, we could manipulate that if we wanted to. Let me zoom in just a hair. Okay, so now we're just going to paste the other stuff in. But before we do that, I'm going to change the mode back to RGB, because if I just paste on the other stuff with it indexed, it's only going to use those 6 colors, right? So everything would look like this. In fact, what you can do is compile the image first and then run the indexed color, and it'll use the same palette for everything. That's a way to go. So, you have that as an option. Let's grab this, and let's just go ahead and paste this, and I'm going to turn it into an actual layer, and I'll move it, and just a hair. I do want to flip this. I'm just going to right-click it, layer, transform, flip horizontally. Here we go. Now we can move it a little bit. There's a little bit of that shining through, so let's zoom in just a hair. What I'm going to do is use the eyedropper tool just to select this color, and then I can just edit this out. Because see, I missed a little bit, so there was that blue hole in there. I can just use this to tidy that up. Okay, we'll save. Okay. And the layers are in order. We're going to need to scale this down and flip this, right? Oops. Okay. And we will scale this down quite a bit. Oops, wrong layer. Yeah, that's fine. Okay, oh, and yeah, we wanted to do, the shadow, right? So let's get the magic wand tool, and I'm actually going to turn its threshold all the way up. And I just want to make sure I'm on the correct layer, and then I'll select that and see what it's done is it's selected me because the threshold is as high as it can get. That means it'll get colors that are very far apart, essentially. So now I'll make a new layer. Okay, and I've got this selected on that new layer, so I should be able just to set this to black and paint it in. There it is. And now I want to move this layer underneath. Okay, still move it. Whoops, wrong layer. Move the active layer. There we go. There it is. Let's see, there's perspective for... And let's see, rotate. And we'll finish up because we don't want to spend a lot of time doing this. Oh, whoops, that was a mistake. Let me Z that out. Okay. It's because I'm rotating the layer. And now I need to move it. Okay. Oh, and I missed. Okay, I missed a step there, which is why it blended those together. And I'm going to go ahead and change the opacity here. Make it shadowy. I'm going to touch it up a bit because I blew it just a hair. Okie doke. So there's the gist of that. Type really quickly. It works pretty similar. I'm just going to type, Frankenstein. May have misspelled that. Okay. You can set the type however you'd like. One thing about this is when you can rotate type, but when you do it, it essentially treats it like a non-type layer. So let me show you what I mean. Let's rotate that 90 degrees. Okay, and I can move this. Now I can still edit this, but watch what happens when I do. See, it turns it back essentially. All that means is generally you have to kind of prep your text first. I'm going to go ahead and put that outline on it. I'm going to right click from path from text and then select from path. That'll give me the outside. Then I can just run a stroke. So I'm going to make sure I'm on white here. Edit stroke path, I believe it is. Stroke line 6. That's probably fine. Okay. And there you see I've got my outline and I can change that. I'm going to go ahead and rotate that now. Set to 90. Okay. So that's the gist of how that works. And then you can spit this out as a PDF as well, just through, I believe it's export. Let's see. Yep, portable document. So I didn't quite finish this one, but we get the gist of how this works. I'll go ahead and export it out. Oops, not ping. Oh, dang it, I selected the wrong thing. File, export as portable document PDF. Yeah, it's because it was. Yeah, ping is a different image format. Okay, so we've got the Photoshop one, and now we have the GIMP one. They're similar. I mean, if I spent more time on the GIMP one, I could make it look more similar. I was kind of just comparing its techniques to the previous one. Yeah, I'd have to fix that shadow. I believe that. But that's just because I mucked up a step while we were doing that. And I didn't put the author's name in there. But that's the gist of how it works. So ultimately what I want you to get out of this is how to transform rhetorical analysis into design, not how to use specific tools. We need that exposure, of course. We do need the practicalities of tool use, but that's what we're doing here is we have a project. So now we could play around with different techniques. When you get into specific problems, you can ask me, hey, how did you do that where you use that filter, or where you were able to select and cut something out from its background? So you can those things make more sense in context rather than just sort of abstractly, here's how to do it, but rather here's how to accomplish a specific task for you. So that's where we're going from here. We'll have workshop time for this. So come with questions. I'm excited to see what you guys come up with. Until then, you can always contact me by email, or I will see you in class. All right, bye.